Joining us now is David Davis, Conservative MP for Halton Price and Howden, former Shadow Home Secretary. David, good evening.
Good evening.
Let's start on that final point there. Would you like to see the security services being given more resources?
I don't know. Simple answer to that. The answer is probably, but I don't know. I mean, the best judge of that is what would they use the resources for? You know, are there bottlenecks they need to resolve? That's the sort of thing that can only be decided internal to government. It's too easy to say, yeah, give them more money. Since the 7/7 bombing, they got a lot more money, a lot more resources. All of the agencies did, and frankly, if you take this, even just going on this ISC report today, it hasn't improved their efficiency much in terms of some of the major problems that went wrong in 7/7.
And you have been quite critical of the intelligence services over the past few years for the way that they operate. What would you like to see change?
Well, I mean, they're going to have to start paying much more attention to what little accountability they have, to what oversight they get. I mean, the ISC has been criticised over time for being too kindly on them, but even the ISC, even a member of the ISC today, George Howarth, was critical in the House of Commons that when you have somebody like Adebolaja, who is on the periphery not of one plot but 4 or 5 plots and turns up 4 or 5 times in their surveillance, that they should recognise that that's a danger indicator in its own right. Now, they were told this with the 7/7 bombers. They missed them in part because they downgraded them too far and then didn't notice that the evidence against them turned up in a number of different areas. They were told about this, told to sort it out. They haven't done so, and Adebolaja slips through the net. You know, so there are real issues of effectiveness and efficiency. I'd also, frankly, like to see them target much more carefully on people and rely less on these mass data collection techniques. It's plain as a pikestaff they don't work. That's one of the things that this case demonstrates.
I suppose it is possible to argue that with the number of terror attacks we've had since 7/7, I mean, they're comparatively few, and there will always be one or two that get through the net, despite all the measures that the government or the intelligence services or the police put in place.
Yeah, that's a harsh truth, I'm afraid, and we have to recognise it. There's no such thing as an entirely safe society.
And I thought Theresa May was kind of warning about that in her speech that she made at the end of last week.
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly fair point. But my argument, I would turn it on its head and I'd say, even if you turn the place into a Soviet state, you can't stop terrorism. After all, they had Chechnya. Be sensible about the balance of attack. The other thing to remember is that terrorism is more frightening than it is dangerous. Now, clearly it's not something that you can say to the parents and close friends and relatives of Lee Rigby or anybody else who's been killed by terrorists. But in objective terms, in the last decade or so, you're talking about less than 55 people killed by terrorists in the UK. In terms of our own history, that's actually quite low. We've had 3,000 in the Irish episode. And in terms of other risks, risks in the NHS, risks on the road, risks of industrial accidents, many poor people die in other ways. So you have to at least take a calm, almost cold view of this and say, okay, what does this justify? What does this justify in terms of giving up liberties? What does it justify in terms of resources? What does it justify in terms of our approach to people on the street? But at the end of the day, what you've got to keep in mind is the most important thing is that the agencies are effective at what they do. And I think some of the approaches they've used, mass data collection and so on, have cost a lot of money, haven't actually delivered a great deal of success in preventing or indeed convicting criminals, and they should perhaps think very hard about that strategy.
And just finally, about Facebook, they have been, well, I heard about named, but they've been identified. They've been identified, shall we say?
They're in the frame.
They're in the frame for a conversation that apparently took place between Adebolaja and Adebowale, which they failed to pass on to the intelligence services. That they say, well, they deprecate what they did as much as anybody. What do organisations like Facebook need to do in the future?
Well, I think, I'm ambivalent about this, because on the one hand, if they did take them offline because they thought they were carrying out terrorist actions, I would think there's a reasonable argument to be made that they should have done something with it. But I wouldn't jump from that to saying there's a duty on Facebook. That's a bit like the flying squad, failing to prevent a murder, blaming the neighbourhood watch. I mean, it's sort of silly. And the argument, well, the agencies, with their $2 billion dedicated to nothing else but this every year, can't cope with 2,000. And then you turn around and say to Facebook, well, you've got 1 billion people on you, and it is 1 billion people, it's not hyperbole. You've got 1 billion people, you keep an eye on all of them. Well, that's ridiculous. There is also a real problem here. The RIPA, the ISC report, implies that the Regulatory Investigatory Powers Act, RIPA, was designed to be supranational. It explicitly was not. As late as 2009, Jackie Smith published a green paper saying exactly that. It was not. You can't make these things supranational. And if you do, you create a precedent for Russia, China, you name it, who do the same to us.
David, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. That's David Davis, the